The first round of the Rugby Championship was an absolute banger. Two amazing games, two very entertaining games, one massive result. In this video, we're going to be covering the Springboks Australia game. However, I will be making a video on that massive Argentina win. So please like and subscribe so that you don't miss it. Let's get started. Now, despite this game's scoreline being roughly what we expected, the game was still very interesting. The first thing that I want to touch on is just the overall performance of both teams. I'd love to hear your opinion as an Australian fan, but I don't think the scoreline is actually that bad when you consider that this is probably the best Springbok side that South Africa has ever produced, at least in the professional era, and this is one of the worst Australian sides. We'll get to this in a little bit, but this scoreline could have been a lot worse in my opinion. And Australia did very well to come back at the end and make it a little bit more respectable. From South Africa's perspective, they were very experimental in this game, particularly on attack. They were trying out many different things in open play and during set plays. An example is that first maul try where the back jumpers went up and the front jumpers went up, and then the back jumpers gave the ball back to the front jumpers and they caught Australia completely off guard. Another example is, I think it was the first scrum of the game, where Colby was in the 9 position and Reinach went back into the backline. Now, they didn't execute on that one perfectly, but I think it just shows the ambition of this team going forward. We also saw a lot of these things against Ireland, against Portugal as well. The Springboks are becoming a team that wants to take the initiative and that wants to take control of the game as quickly as possible. Whereas in the past, the Springboks were really focusing on capitalizing on their opponent mistakes. So they wanted to put pressure on their opponents first, and then when the opportunities arise, then they would strike. I feel like this team now wants to generate opportunities even if their opponents aren't making mistakes, and that's really exciting. The first half of this game was extremely dominant by the Springboks. I don't think I've ever seen the Springboks have quite a dominant half like that, particularly against Tier 1 opposition. The Springboks ended the half with 66% of the territory versus 34% by Australia. But here is an absolutely mind-blowing stat. Australia only had 2% possession in the Springboks' 22, and the Springboks had 41% possession in Australia's 22. Australia had virtually no chances during the first half. And the Springboks also had a 59% possession rate. South Africa was also great in defense and very physically dominant. Australia had 68 carries during the first half, but they only made 50 post-contact meters. That is less than 1 meter per carry. And they were caught behind the gain line on multiple occasions, and that really denied them any attacking momentum. South Africa had a 90% tackle success rate, while Australia only had a 79% tackle success rate. Australia's discipline was also a big issue for them. They had 8 penalties by halftime. That amount of penalties is generally what you want over the course of the entire game. And in terms of the set piece, the lineouts were about equal. We'll get to this in a little bit, but the scrums were very dominant for South Africa. And this gave them a lot of good platforms throughout that first half. So those were really the good things by South Africa. They were solid in the basics, and they were very ambitious, and on top of that, it paid off. It generated a lot of opportunities. However, despite this massive dominance and despite these massive amounts of opportunity, South Africa just couldn't capitalize on a high number of them. I think you all know what I'm talking about. That Willie Leroux, when he failed to give the pass, I think it was a 3-on-1 or a 4-on-1. That was a certain try that needed to be converted that unfortunately they just couldn't get over the line. Another one is that break by Eben Etzebeth on the outside and he got tackled out. And I also remember one by Peter Steff where he also found himself in space on the outside and he was tackled out as well. The Springboks are really good at creating danger moments for their opponents, and that is amazing. However, they don't mean much if you aren't converting a lot of them into tries. This is something that we touched on in the Ireland games. The Springboks are very dangerous, but they just aren't getting the points that they want and that they need. In this game, it's fine because Australia is a little bit weaker than most other teams. However, against bigger teams like New Zealand, despite that result, New Zealand will be a lot better, and the Springboks are going to have to take their chances. They have to be more ruthless. And speaking of generating opportunities, how incredible was Sasha? SFM is looking like he could become the world's premier number 10. He has a lot of vision and he looks incredibly threatening with ball in hand. The most important thing is when he has ball in hand, he's able to really draw defenders and put his support runners into space a lot. Now, his performance wasn't perfect. He still made a lot of inexperienced mistakes and he's still a young guy. However, he will learn from this. What I really like about Sasha is that the mistakes that he's making are not really that dumb. He's got an incredible amount of talent and he performs where it matters, in his attacking threats and in his kicking. The mistakes that he's making are these really small technical details that he's not getting right, and that will come with time as he gains more experience. Now, those were some of the good things, but let's look at some of the bad things that this team can work on. The first thing is that despite not losing a ton of lineouts, I felt that the lineout was a little bit shaky. I think that the Springboks got a little bit lucky by not losing more lineouts even in that dominant first half. And I think the only reason why they didn't lose more is because Australia were just as woeful. This is particularly important to get right and to work on because historically New Zealand have the best lineouts in the world. So if we're thinking about the future, it's going to be vital for them to improve in this area. And I also did just mention this, but just better decision making and trying to focus a bit more on continuity. I think it's likely that going forward, the Springboks are going to generate a lot more opportunities, and a lot of our forwards, our big forwards, are going to find themselves in more space. I think it's going to be very important for the Springbok coaching staff to let the players know exactly what to do and what the plan is, to become more clear when they're in that position, what should they do. So for example, that Eben Etzebeth break, if you look at that break, Eben just puts his head down and tries to run over the guy. And I think that that's not very smart. Now, of course, this isn't me blaming Eben. Eben's played in systems where, he's supposed to just run over people, where he doesn't find himself in that position a lot. But I think going forward, it's going to be crucial for them to work on these types of skills. For example, in that position, I thought that it would have been better for Eben to cut inside and to get closer to his support runners, or maybe even to look for the offload. This is a bit of a minor criticism. Again, I'm not criticizing the player. I just think that it's a new system that they're going to have to work on. I also think Australia deserves a bit of credit for the way that they went about this game. Rugby is a game about momentum. This team will get on top, then that team will get on top, and then this team will get on top again. But in general, the momentum tends to be pretty close. And in this game, the Springboks had a lot of momentum in the first half, to the point where I felt that the scoreline really favoured Australia by the end of the first half. And that trend could have just as easily continued into the second half. However, Australia did come back and they made it very difficult towards the end for South Africa. I mean, the fact that South Africa got 3 yellow cards towards the end of the game just shows under how much pressure they actually were. And the fact that Australia were able to turn the tide as much as they did, it might not make you ecstatic for the future, but it is definitely a positive that they can take going forward, and it should be mentioned. That being said, and I did think of this quite a bit over the last day, how exciting is it to be a Springbok fan? I don't think I've ever seen a Springbok side that quite looks like this, where they have attacking threats all across the park and they are threatening no matter where they are on the field. The Springboks went coast to coast in this game a lot of times, and that's very, very exciting because that's generally not what we're used to seeing from the Springboks, even historically. I think this is the first time in the professional era that we see a Springbok side that can score from their own 22, that can generally and consistently score from their own 22. I think the Springboks are looking more like the All Blacks than the All Blacks themselves. And I'm genuinely excited to see how those games against the All Blacks are going to go. Because yes, of the last 5 games, 3 of them were against weaker opposition. However, against those 2 Ireland tests, the Springboks made a lot of problems for Ireland, and it'll be really interesting to see if they can replicate that against the All Blacks. And even Argentina, let's not forget about them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Cheers, guys.